Now welcome to another Let's Talk Some Star Wars, where this time we'll be taking a look at and discussing the results of the poll that asked you what you thought of the third episode of The Acolyte. I'll then of course be reading and responding to a few of the comments left on the poll, and so let's get right to the results, where we'll see that only 2% of voters thought it was an excellent or really good episode. Another 4% then said it was pretty good, or at least above average. 12% felt it was okay, or maybe a bit below average, which left 22% to say it was terrible or just not very good at all. And there was also a final 60% who either just haven't watched it yet, or don't plan on watching it at all. And when we factor them out, when we only look at those who have watched this episode and rated it in this poll and redo the math here, this is what the breakdown looks like. More than half of those who have seen it thought it was either bad or terrible, and only about 15% thought it was good to at least some degree. Alright, and this is now the part of the video where I usually talk about how these are just the results I got on my particular poll, that they do not necessarily reflect the feelings of the fan base on the whole, just the feelings of those who watch my videos, which yes, do tend to closely align with my own feelings. And my opinion of The Acolyte thus far has not been a very positive one, that's for sure. I certainly have plenty of issues with the show. I do not think it has been very good at all, though I don't know that it's been quite as bad as some say it has been. I mean, yeah, it has been bad, but I do think some have gone a little far with their negative reaction, or they decided they were going to hate it long before it came out, and then, or now that it is out and they're watching it, they have found every reason to hate, or they found the reasons they said they were going to hate it for, and are proclaiming it pretty much the worst show ever made, just like, again, they thought or said it would be beforehand. And though, sure, you could certainly argue that's an unfair way to approach something you're planning on giving a review of, the same way I've argued before there's no real value in a review given by someone who is always positive towards Star Wars. If you never have anything critical to say, or very, very rarely, if you only ever really say good things about pretty much every piece of content, you're not giving an actual review either, because I do think saying you're reviewing something means you are coming at it from a place or a starting point of objectivity. And don't get me wrong, you can love Star Wars all you want. You don't ever have to say bad things about it if you don't want to, but if you always end up loving it, you're maybe not being very critical. Just like if you always hate everything about it, you might not be as fair as you maybe could be either. Though, yeah, maybe it really does just suck that bad. Maybe there are some serious problems with Star Wars, and the people who do that, who always talk negatively about it, maybe they're trying to make a point about that. And when you consider just how many people, according to the numbers, that seem to be either not watching it at all or not enjoying something like The Acolyte, and how many seem to be watching reviews that just do nothing but bash it, and how many people are also review bombing it, if you will, on places like Rotten Tomatoes, well, if you are someone who likes all things Star Wars, or most things, if you want to see the franchise do well, or if you're Disney and Lucasfilm and you really want to see it do well because you want to make some money, I think the question finally has to be, what is happening here? How have we gotten to this point? I think it's time to stop ignoring these numbers and ask the hard questions about the franchise. Because, like them or not, agree with them or not, these are the numbers we have to work with. People are voting negatively in polls like this one. People are watching in very high numbers those who make videos who just rip the show apart. Some even get millions of clicks or views. And someone or many someones are taking the time out of their day to tank the score on Rotten Tomatoes. And if you really, really want to, yeah, you can just bury your head in the sand and go on loving Star Wars and say it is all just the haters being haters, or that no one hates Star Wars like Star Wars fans, or even say it's just people being bigots and they don't want all the diversity in Star Wars. That's what's really going on here. It's just the rejection of diversity, and these people shouldn't be listened to anyway. Even though there's always been diversity in Star Wars, maybe not as much as there could have been. And also many of the same people who are tearing apart The Acolyte now, they enjoyed something like Andor, which also has quite a bit of diversity, though no one ever complained about it there. Why is that? Why don't we ask that question? But anyway, yeah, you can just keep on saying it's all haters or terrible people trying to bring Star Wars down for this reason or that, and since it's a reason you don't agree with, it all invalidates their reviews or their opinions of it. But that doesn't change the fact that it is happening. It doesn't change the fact that many people who probably used to love Star Wars, I mean, you gotta love it to some degree if you care enough to do everything they're doing, to make these videos, to watch these videos, to leave comments on polls, to go review bomb it, whatever it might be. But they don't like it anymore, and they are not only not liking it, but they are actively against it. And why is that? I think it's finally time to ask why this is happening. What could possibly be wrong with Star Wars? And though, no, Star Wars is never going to die. There will always be fans of Star Wars. It will always live on in some capacity. But if you want to keep getting shows and movies, if you don't want to see it sidelined because it's not pulling in enough money to justify being made anymore, maybe, again, it's time to finally ask, is there something wrong with Star Wars? Do the haters have any real points? Even if they maybe do go about making them in the wrong way sometimes. Ask yourself, am I really loving Star Wars as it is, or do I refuse to say anything bad about it, either because I just really don't want to say anything bad because I love it, or is it because I don't want to be seen as one of those haters that I have been chastising for years and calling bigots and all sorts of things? Is that the reason why I refuse to say anything bad or be critical of it? I don't know, just a little something to think about. Alright, and now let's get to a few comments here, and I don't think I will do too many today. A lot of them are very similar, and there honestly wasn't a lot of positive ones either to bring up to kind of be a counterbalance. I do usually try to give both sides of the argument, and even of those who did say they liked it, they didn't really go too deep into why they liked it. There were a lot of those who kind of talked about how they were upset it's getting so much hate and they don't understand why it is. But anyway, let's get to a few comments, and I will give some quick responses as well. And the first one is, of course, or as always, is the top-rated comment from the poll, which this time came to us from W29N22B27, who said, "Thank you for now adding the option of not going to in your polls." And first of all, I always get asked why I don't include certain options in polls, and the reason for that is I only get 5 options. YouTube limits it to 5, for better or worse. So if you ever wonder why I don't include more options, well, that is the reason. And it should also be noted that this time, unlike last week where I put not watched it yet, but plan to and not going to watch it at all, this week I lumped them together because I wanted to get a more, shall we say, nuanced take on what people thought who had actually seen it. I wanted to kind of break it down into 4 categories, so really good, really negative, and kind of 2 in between. And so we have 60% who either are not watching it at all or who maybe will watch it, and that kind of correlates to what we had last week. We had, I think, 49% who said they weren't going to watch it at all, and like 12 who said they were going to watch it. So that number is kind of the same. Does that mean that some people have watched it now and are reviewing it, and that some people who have watched it or watched the first 2 episodes didn't watch this one? Hard to say, hard to know, but again, it seems like only 2/5 of people who watch my videos or vote in these polls are actually watching it right now. Alright, and our next question here comes to us from Go40, who said, "I'm watching House of the Dragon right now in preparation for the 2nd season, and the contrast between that and The Acolyte is immense. Why can't Star Wars also have good writing and an amazing production value? Star Wars used to be at the top of the food chain, but now it feels like a parody." And I've been talking quite a bit about numbers in this video, and one number to bring up is 180 million, which is apparently the budget of this show. I don't know if that is confirmed or an estimate or what, but around 180 would put it on par with some of the other shows as well. Anyway, that would then mean each episode has a budget of over $20 million, and I've seen a lot of people making this comparison, that it has a bigger budget, or each episode has a bigger budget than a film like Godzilla Minus One, which looked incredible for its relatively tiny budget when you compare it to some of the mega blockbuster prices we get in Hollywood. And honestly, I don't know why it looks, I don't want to say cheap, it doesn't look terrible, but a lot of these Disney Plus shows, when you hear the budget, you're like, well, shouldn't it look a little bit better? We've seen other shows on other networks or other streaming services that have comparable budgets and just look so much better. I think House of the Dragon is a good example, and not only does it beat it in terms of production values and just everything else in that department, but the writing. Why is it that we always have Star Wars shows that are written for children, or feel like they're written for a much younger audience than what is actually watching these shows? I talked before at the start about maybe it's time to ask some hard questions. Well, maybe another question we need to ask is, are kids really watching Star Wars? Or should it be more focused on the adults who are watching it? Now, I don't mean to say we should never have Star Wars that tries to appeal to younger viewers. Certainly we should. It's a generational thing. That's one of the things I like about Star Wars, is that it has or spans multiple generations. But I think you're missing the fact that most of the people who are interested in it right now want something a little more adult. And no, I'm not saying everything has to be like Andor, but I feel like Andor approached Star Wars like it approached an adult property, right? And I don't mean adult property, but you get what I'm saying here. It didn't take it as this thing that is supposed to be for children first, that adults happen to enjoy as well. It treated it like something far more serious, and, well, a lot of people really appreciated that approach. I don't know, I think it is time for some really hard questions for the Star Wars franchise, just all around. But anyway, let's now move on to this comment from Lee Walker, who said, I feel the mystery would have worked better if the series started with a shorter version of the events, or if pieces were dropped throughout the other episodes. And I agree, the series probably should have started with the third episode, or something like it, maybe not the exact third episode as we got it, but it kind of misled people with the marketing about what the mystery was even going to be. Most people, I feel like the mystery was going to be, well, who is killing the Jedi? That's why people made a big deal out of the twin reveal at one point, because they felt that was going to be the twist. We were going to be led to believe this character might be killing the Jedi, but the twist was no, it's her twin sister. And that turned out to be not the twist, or not a mystery at all. In fact, what the mystery is supposed to be is what happened 16 years ago to lead to the present tense of the story where May is killing the Jedi. But again, it doesn't get presented that way, or like that's what the mystery was going to be. It is kind of this background thing that eventually we get told is the mystery, and that we are now apparently going to see from multiple angles and never be able to know exactly what happened. That seems to be Headland's point. She's talked about Rashomon, how this is based on a kind of a Kurosawa movie from a long time ago, where you can see things from multiple perspectives and kind of have to come to your own conclusion. But honestly, I'm just not sure that is the best format for Star Wars. People like to know things definitively in Star Wars, for better or worse. We fans like to know what is the canon, what is the actual story. So I just think this was kind of maybe the wrong idea for Star Wars. And I'm just independent of what the show has turned out to be. But if you would have told me this ahead of time, like, we're going to give you this story that is kind of up to you to interpret, you're never really going to know what is happening, or who is to blame, or who is at fault, I would have probably told you that is just a bad idea, because that is not what people generally want out of Star Wars, I think. Especially if it tends to imply that the witches who use the dark side, as far as we know, that they might be perceived as the sympathetic ones, that they might be the ones who ultimately people believe are in the right. I don't know, I just think this is all just kind of a mistake all around. Alright, let's do like 2 more questions here, and we'll do this one from Capac Apasson, I think. I don't get all the hate, honestly. I thought it was a perfectly okay and entertaining, if not slightly boring at times, episode of TV. I think the issue lies in the release schedule. If we could binge the rest of the series, such a backstory-heavy setup episode wouldn't be as terrible. I absolutely loved Andor, but I'm really glad I could binge the series. Waiting 1 week in between episodes would have made me find the show a lot slower paced. And I think a big part of the problem here, and this maybe even begins to sort of answer my opening question, and you can say this is fair or not, you can agree or disagree or not, but if something Star Wars is kind of average or even slightly boring at times, that is the same thing as just being flat out bad. I think people have high expectations when it comes to Star Wars. It is, or many people think it should be, the premier franchise. It should be the show or movie every other franchise wants to be because it is so good and has so many happy, satisfied fans, and is making so much money even. Instead, oftentimes the argument or debate seems to be, or people seem to review it as, well, it's not bad, it's pretty good, it's average, I didn't hate it. And the people who are passionate about it, again, kind of like I was saying before, they tend to always be passionate about Star Wars, so does that really mean anything? I also think you bring up on maybe an issue that streaming the shows have, that we do have to wait a week in between them, so it's hard to have just a backstory-heavy episode that really maybe doesn't have its own place and purpose beyond that. It doesn't tell its own story, it's meant to just be a backstory. Now, I'm not saying that's what the problem was with this episode. I don't think it was just backstory. I do think it kind of had its own little self-contained story. I just don't think it was very good. But I do think you touch on maybe a problem with streaming, that we now have this different approach to how we tell stories in a show. That they don't feel like every episode needs to be on point because, well, it's part of a bigger story. And if you're binging it, if you release all the episodes at once, it's not as big of a deal. You can, as you're kind of saying, you can watch a backstory heavy episode and then move on to something else, and there's really no separation there. It's all part of the same thing, so it doesn't feel like this one episode was out of place or something was wrong with it. Again, I think there's a really interesting discussion about how streaming services have just changed what we expect out of entertainment, and that it is not always easy to look at things as individual episodes when they are meant to be part of a much larger story. Alright, and final comment here, and this one kind of goes along with that last one, but this one is from Edward Thompson, who said, I think this episode quality depends entirely on future episodes. There were odd jumps and missing information in that flashback that suggest it will be fleshed out later. It depends on how it is fleshed out. Well, flammable rocks aside, that was goofy. Even if they explain it, doesn't change how goofy it felt in the moment. Alright, so again, kind of going along with my response to the previous comment about how series or shows have kind of changed the format in which they use. Well, one argument I often hear, and I hear it a lot for The Acolyte thus far, and this comment kind of makes it in a manner of speaking, but they'll say we can't judge the show until we see the whole thing. We don't know how it's all going to end. But the problem is you have to make me want to get to the ending. You can't tell me the ending is great. You can't tell me the 8th episode will be this huge payoff, but the 7 previous episodes were all bad. I'm never going to get to your payoff. I'm never going to get to your incredible ending if you can't hook me early and keep me on the line and keep me interested in whatever that ending will eventually be. There are a lot of people who will get angry at me essentially for reviewing each individual episode, saying you can't just review one piece of the puzzle and come to a conclusion about the puzzle. But again, if I don't like the opening pieces, if I don't like the opening episodes, I'm never going to see the completed puzzle. So yes, you can judge individual episodes as you go. You can fairly review them, because if you don't like something, you're not going to watch the whole thing. This idea that I have to watch the whole thing to fairly judge it is kind of silly, because you have to, again, you have to hook me. You have to make me want to watch the whole thing. If not, then I'm going to review it and say, it doesn't do anything early enough to get to whatever ending it ultimately has. Well, that's going to be all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about anything I had to say here, or what any of these comments had to say, or my response to them. Either way, leave a comment below. Let's talk some Star Wars, and until next time, thanks for watching.